Going to be giving you a quick update on the weekly Bitcoin curve that we've been following. So this is week number 4 now, and from the end of this we'll also be producing the curve for week number 5. So we're doing this for 6 weeks to see how this curve can provide us any bias to the markets. So we know that the week ends on the 2nd of March. So once all this data has come into effect, we will be able to get an accurate forecast due to the time zone issues between Australia and the data source, which would be most likely European or GMT0. We're actually several hours behind that. So in this case, whilst the forecast that I put out right away is going to be general in nature, we'll be able to get a more vivid idea on what we're looking at as we move forward. So just remember, this purple stuff is when the forecast comes into unknown territories. So everything in the past, it kind of calculates. And then once it gets past the purple area, it then becomes unknown territory. And all it can do then is basically guess what's going to occur. And it does that by using cycles, okay? Once it's got its cycles, it then produces its sine wave, okay? And this is basically what it looks like. So what we have here is we have the period from the 24th to the 2nd, and that, again, like I mentioned, comprises last week, the one that we just went through. The original suggestion for last week was that the market would fall. That was how the week was going to start. That is, as we can see, absolutely, this is how the week started. And the turn dates that I was looking for were between the 25th to the 26th time frame. I then looked for a top to occur around the 28th, 27th to 28th. I believe I said the 28th I was looking for a potential top. In this case, we could see that the top came, sorry, the top didn't come, the inversion of that top came, okay, and it was actually a low around this point. So the dates always work, okay? But right now we're heading into the 2nd, and if the market pushes up into this point, it doesn't have to push up much. If the market pushes up into the 2nd or the 3rd, I'd expect a possible change of trend to occur. So the 28th to the 1st is a sensitive point. We definitely expect the markets to make some sort of reaction around this point. As we can see, towards the 28th, this reaction came in. So just a couple of hours before that midnight. Again, that all depends on the time set I have. So if I change it to Sydney, for example, this whole time zone changes for the Sydney location again. And if I then have to basically reprogram this. It's the same curve, but we just reprogram it for the date. So I can go back in time, and this would be the cyclical curve based on the Sydney time zone. Very, very similar. Normally I stick it to GMT0. That's just because we have people from all over the world, so I stick it to GMT0 so you can get kind of like that average. So as you can see, this was the curve that played out using the Sydney time zone. Unfortunately, the natal date of Bitcoin was around Dublin, so we used the Dublin time zone, which would be around GMT0, which is also another reason why I use GMT0. So if I just do GMT, that's just going to correct it up again, so we're using GMT0 for this time period. Let's go ahead and now fix this. So I'd like to say that the curve, the curve that this cycle produced was not 100% accurate. We know that, that's impossible. It did give us a directional bias to be bearish at the start of the week. However, it would have signaled, especially if we were looking for these turns to occur, and we had one possible turn here pointing up and another possible turn here pointing up before going into its final low, which would have been some false positives, which we would have been looking for. But overall, we did get that trajectory down, and then it was just this period, if you can see the mouse moving, this period right here would have shown some confusion for the investor or trader, whatever you're doing, for going long. But we knew that once the low point was in, we were heading up. Where we're heading now, well, I'd expect a little bit of a push higher into the 3rd before a possible downward motion. It doesn't have to be big. You know, these curves are starting to flatten out now. So let's go forward now and take a look at next week. Okay, so I'm going to set the LBC forward. It then recalculates all the data and then tries to realign all the curves. Okay, so every week the curves can slightly change, and the curves need to move. Okay, they go through what's called an offset, and they need to be either brought forward or moved backwards to resync up. Okay, once the curves are resynced up, we can then forecast out into the future. So again, next week is going to be comprising of the 3rd to the 9th, and we have 2 curves running. We have one red and one blue. And this is what it's going to look like. Okay, now GMT 0 is going to give us this. So what we have here is we have a wobbly mess. Okay, this looks like sideways trajectory. There's no clear direction. I might need to do this on a different GMT offset just to see if I can correct the time zones here, just for my observation. So if we're going from the 3rd to the 9th, I'm just going to highlight it quickly. So the 3rd starts here, the 9th ends here. Some key points, some key dates that I would be watching would be definitely the 3rd. So we could possibly get, looks like a bit of a hard one here, whether we're going to get a top or a bottom on the 3rd. If the market moves up into the 3rd, then I'd say it's likely to be a top. If it moves down into the 3rd, it'd be a bottom. The next one, the next date that I'd be watching would be the 5th. Okay, the 5th looks like it possibly might be a top. Again, both curves are signaling two different things now, so this is actually very confusing. I would take the red curve as my primary curve, and that's just based on my bias. Okay, my bias could be wrong, but my bias would probably suggest this one. So low, possible high on the 3rd, possible low around the 4th or the 5th. I'd go with the 5th. Then would swing up. Okay, so 4th to the 5th would swing up into a possible top on that 5th. Okay, so it's just going to be a quick, sharp move up. It can be, a couple $100, it could be a couple $1,000, just that push higher. So it should push higher into this time frame, and then it would basically trade sideways for a little while, sell off into possibly the 8th, and then move up higher into the 10th. And the reason for that is it's probably going to set us up into a top around, if we are topping out. Okay, so the polarities could flip, but if this is of any benefit to us, could possibly put us into a top into the 12th. I'd go even as far out into the 15th. Okay, so these are the dates. I'm yelling out a bunch of dates, and the reason for that is because I'm looking at the time by degrees, or the sensitive degrees of the zodiac, to get our dates. So we use these dates. I've been using these dates for a very, very long time, and I'd be watching generally within the week to see how they would actually line up. Now, if you've done the time by degrees course, so I know a number of you have actually enrolled and done that, go ahead and overlay the weather forecasting method that I taught you, because that'll help you navigate the highs and lows a bit better. And also just make sure you have your location for the weather set to somewhere like Melbourne, or somewhere where there's very visible extremes. Okay, so that'll help us pinpoint the tops and the bottoms of the market using that. So with all that said, I'll cut this video off. This is now your next week forecast. Again, unfortunately, very, very choppy, and two very different curves happening here. We've got a lot of inversions, you see. So high, low, low, high, high, low, high, low, high, low. And this is the only period here where they both sync up again. So it's very, very hard to project. The blue curve is our shorter sine wave, so it's more volatile. The red curve is the major moves. And you can just see how in the past both of them have operated. So you can kind of see how they're both interlinked with each other. But this week coming up, it's a shamble, it's a mess. So I don't really have any clear direction using this curve for week 5.